Okay, good morning, everyone. These lights are super obnoxious. The last time I was in front of this many cops with bright lights, my lawyer just kept telling me to deny everything. So I'm Dr. Jay McNeil, and I've got Chief of Police from Clinton, Wisconsin, Chief David Hooker. He's kind of like a doctor, he is. And then Dr. Chris Wistrom. So we try not to act like doctors. If we act too much like doctors, just come up and slap us around. Or if you're going to tase someone, do it to him. His beard absorbs the energy, diffuses it. So I've got some announcements we got to go through first, so let me get to that. Some housekeeping notes. IACP would like to remind the audience that the following activities are prohibited in this workshop: taking flash photos during the sessions, taking photos of slide presentations. This session is being video recorded and will be available on the IACP members website in approximately 1 month. If we are able to take audience questions, please step to the microphone in the aisle and ask your questions. If the session is crowded, you can move to the center. I think we're fine. I saw a lot of line of duty injuries last night at Sam and Bubby's, but I think we made it through for the most part. If your badge was not scanned, make sure you scan your badge. There are workshop monitors outside the room who can scan your badge. If you missed scanning your badge, you can adjust your workshop certificate after the session. There was a kiosk out there I saw last night. Your feedback is important, and they use that to help improve future conferences, so your session surveys are part of the workshop certificates this year. Stop by the workshop certificate desk, scan your badge, and complete a 5-question survey. For each session you attend, certificates are available via email once your surveys for all the sessions are complete. Handouts are available for download in the IACP Central, the Hub, and on the conference mobile app. Please note that not all speakers make handouts available. We did. Ours should be there. If they're not, let us know. Make sure all cell phones and electronic devices are silenced. You guys are important people. You know, if you get something to do, just take your call and step out. And please visit the exposition hall, as those companies make help IACP the success it is. The hall is located on level 2 and is open Sunday and Monday 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. and then again Tuesday from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Now I'd like to hand the session over to our speakers. Okay, I guess that's me. So, what we're going to talk about today is a community approach to active shooter preparedness. And for us, it was a multidisciplinary journey that involved communications, law enforcement, fire, EMS, public works, emergency management, lots of people that you wouldn't otherwise think about. So we are not here to tell you that this is the way that you have to do it. This is descriptive of how it worked for us. It's not prescriptive. If there's things that you learn from it, that's great. If there's things that you can teach us, that's great. We'll be around for a while afterwards. The goal here is to save lives, and that's it. And so I want to thank you for everything you do. As a physician, I am not a police officer. I'm assigned to several SWAT teams, and I appreciate what you men and women do every day. You get maligned in the press. It's not fair, but we appreciate what you do. Just the day before I got here, I had 2 officers save someone with an AED, and a week before that I had 3 actually of his officers save someone with bleeding control that was critically injured in a highway accident. So we are doing great stuff out there, and typically when there's a medical emergency, a lot of you all are showing up before we get there, because we're fire and EMS and emergency doctors. We got to get out of the lazy boy and turn the TV off, shut off the popcorn machine. So we do have a disclaimer. Dr. Wistrom and I built a bleeding control kit about 6 years ago, and for that we received absolutely nothing. We work for a nonprofit, and we've built the kit as a nonprofit, so there's no financial influence from any of it to us. We messed up. Okay, disclaimer number 2. This is the Punisher cow. We tried to use this as our mascot, but we couldn't get it in the Bearcat. Quite honestly, if we did, the guys would probably shoot it and try to eat it. These guys shot a bunch of wild boars while I was down here, so I was invited. They wanted to get me out in the swamp, and they told me that I had to wear my pants backwards, so that concerned me, and I avoided that activity. So we are from Wisconsin, where even the cows have attitudes. Sorry, being recorded here. Got to remember this might come up in 35 years when I try and do something with my life. So, at times we've been told we're not politically correct. I'm sorry. We're here to save lives, not be popular. We will try to keep our foul language under control so there's something left of the video recording when they're done with the bleeper. So I'm going to introduce the speakers. Chief Hooker, he's Chief of Clinton Police Department, U.S. Army veteran. He's Chairman of the Rock County Active Shooter Task Force. He's President of the Rock County Law Enforcement Association. How long is that term?
Probably till I say I'm done.
Okay, he's hoping soon, I think. President, master's degree in public administration, 30 years in law enforcement, 14 years firefighter EMT. He couldn't decide what he wanted to do with his life. He tried red, he tried blue, now he's a little bit of purple. Okay, 12 years of college law enforcement, emergency management planning as well. I'm the EMS medical director for about 110 agencies in the state line area of Wisconsin and Illinois. I'm fellowship trained in EMS. I've been on a federal disaster team. I've done tactical medicine since I was a paramedic back in the 90s. I did terrorism and public health preparedness for a think tank public health group. And then I've done hazmat emergency response. And then when I applied to the sheriff's office, they said, "You have the perfect face for radio. Get in dispatch, boy." That's what I did. And I probably was a boy because I was 17 at the time when they hired me with no training and threw me in the dispatch center. So I had somebody call me once and tell me they killed themselves. And my response was, "No, you didn't. I didn't have any crisis intervention training at that time. I was 17. What did I know?" Dr. Wistrom started as an ambulance driver at age 16.
I've done stuff. Move on. They got time.
Yep. All right. He went to college at Northwest Missouri State University, med school at Kirksville, residency at Henry Ford, so has seen his share of GSWs, SWAT physician, father of two, husband to a lovely lady. You want me to move on past that? You can't go home if I move on past that.
That's the only important highlight on that whole thing.
There you go. And he works in the field with me. So the background, we're going to go through some of this, and you guys are law enforcement. You know this stuff better than me. There's the background. We've had a lot of shooting incidents. I was a med student at Virginia Tech. I was there when the shooting happened. I was not on campus. I was at a rural health clinic checking prostate exams. So I was pretty upset that I was 35 to 40 minutes away, and by the time I got there, it was just cleanup. As a paramedic, I wanted to be there. As a med student, I wanted to be there to help. But that certainly impacted me as I went through my medical school training, residency, and then my fellowship. That has always clung to me, going to church on Sunday morning and having pictures of dead kids all over the other kids' t-shirts. Okay, so if any of you have been involved in this, you know that it will impact you for the rest of your life. So the FBI report an active shooter from 2013, and it's changed a little bit since then, average of 11.4 incidents annually. 70% of the incidents occurred in either a commercial building or educational environment, and shootings occurred in most of the states. 60% of the incidents ended before police arrived. And this is something that we really honed in on when we started to develop our rescue task force model. So there's a tabletop winner of 2013, and Dr. Wistrom attended that. I had attended one prior to that. It was led by G.B. Jones, an FBI agent that's assigned to us locally. And there was a lot of attention being given to the active shooter and how to deal with the active threat, which makes sense. You got to stop the killing to stop the dying. We get that. Very heavy focus on police operations. EMS and law enforcement and fire operation, the interoperability was not really even discussed at that point 6 years ago. So we kind of sat around for a while and we said, what's happening on the medical end of this? What are we doing to help these people right away, knowing that people could bleed to death in under 2 minutes from a femoral artery injury? And unfortunately, the answer was not much of anything. There's cards and guides by the DOJ and the FBI, but we realized...
Jay, if I may.
Yeah.
So I was at that tabletop, and I learned a valuable lesson that day, and it worked really well. So it's one that I'd like to pass along to y'all is be very careful when you ask questions that you know the answers to. But also selectively choose your audience when you do so. So we're at the tabletop, and they ask, does anybody have any questions? And I'm sitting, the teacher's going next, and I'm in front of her, and I'm like, I got a question for her. I want her to open her eyes, and she's the next one to speak. I said, what happens for medical care from time of injury until time it's safe for the EMS folks to come in? And she just looked at me and said, what do you mean time's safe? I said, well, in Columbine, which is granted a long time ago, 3.5 hours from time of injury until time EMS arrived at the injured inside. And her jaw hit the floor. She says, nothing, and we need to do something about it. And that's with that audience in mind and asking that question that you know the answer to, that's part of what propelled a lot of this stuff forward. So I just wanted to add that to the story.
I'm going as fast as I can. I know these guys are like chomping at the bit up here. That's why I kept them separated. I pulled a chair out in between all of them. Look at how close they are. They're holding hands up here. All right, so Anytown, USA, community threat levels at baseline. We're going to work into our case study now. All the kids are in school, parents are at work, and the criminals are being criminal. You know, I don't know if you guys have the same problem we do. We think the most dangerous thing in Janesville, Wisconsin, is to mind your own business. It's minding my own business. These two dudes came up and just beat the hell out of me, Doc. Yeah, and I know the cops planted those drugs on you, too, that I just found. I'm not going to tell you where I found them, but I can find them. Community resources. We've got 4 advanced life support ambulances, 5 fire engines, 10 on-duty police cruisers. We have 1 position response vehicle, ground-based. We have 1 air medical resource. We've got a SWAT team, a level 2 trauma center, a level 3 trauma center, and a freestanding emergency department with no trauma designation. So pretty good amount of resources. And that's for a community of about 60,000 people. And the surrounding county, you know, we're up to around 100,000, so not all that big. So Blue Monday, I think this is the day everybody realizes what they've spent on Christmas. This is, I think, in January, maybe the first Monday after Christmas, I don't remember. You've got a Home Depot, movie theater, Gander Mountain, Texas Roadhouse, all that kind of stuff. And it's just like any town anybody lives in. So the scenario starts 11 a.m., 911 receives a call of a disturbance at the local movie theater. 11:01, 911 begins to become overloaded with phone calls and texts to 911. Injured and bleeding adults in Theater 7. 11:01, dispatch starts putting out citywide alert, police, fire, EMS, and dispatched. All those resources to the general area. Law enforcement will initially make contact and try to sort out what exactly is going on. 11:04, first PD unit arrives on scene and he finds multiple victims running out of the theater. Still no idea what's going on. A minute later, 911 is now receiving calls of an active shooter in the shopping plaza to the east of the theater. So now we've got a location that's moving with an active shooter. So police, fire, EMS, they're at the usual baseline workload. 50% of the resources are dedicated to the current day-to-day situation. Hospitals are busy, it's flu season, and the ERs are full with the emergency low back pain and runny nose for 3 hours that we're taking care of in the emergency department. Operating rooms are occupied with routine cases, the hip replacement, the pacemaker placements, all those types of things. So we're busy because hospitals have to be busy to make money. So we're not going to have a lot of rooms available for you initially, and that's why it's important to keep us aware of what's going on in the field so we can start moving the meat, as we say. Okay, so there's some of the resources we have available. I did catch one of my doctors driving that big armored car down there next to our little Suburban, and I was just scared that he was going to crush it. I'm glad he had the new Suburban, because if he had the old Tahoe, it would have been fair game. He would have just demolished it and hoped for a new truck. So 11:06, additional PD units arrive. They find an officer down. He's bleeding. He's trying to self-apply a tourniquet. He's behind a vehicle in the east parking lot of that movie theater I showed you. 11:07, the suspect is quickly neutralized with a patrol rifle. 11:07, EMS is still staging a block away, hearing gunshots. So now we're about 6-7 minutes into the incident. Anybody that's shot in the femoral artery is now dead. 11:07, hospitals are unclear of the victim count, but they shut down all the elective cases in the OR, try to clear out the emergency departments, the CAT scanners, lab, and x-ray to get ready. About 11:07 to 11:10, the media starts calling the dispatch center. And about that same time, when family members start getting texts from their relatives laying there in the theater, they start showing up on scene as well. So we are headed towards calamity. We're getting additional police units arriving on the scene. Remember, EMS has made no victim, no patient contact at this point. 11:08, a police sergeant arrives on scene, establishes unified command with fire battalion chief because they know things are getting wonky already and they've got to get it together. 11:08, the police units are inside the structure, beginning a primary search and active shooter clearing approach. SWAT team is also alerted, and some of those members are already on scene doing their SWAT stuff. 11:15, there's a 911 call received. There's an additional suspect running behind the freestanding ER 1 block away. That's bad news because we thought we had one shooter. Maybe we do, maybe we don't. It's all kind of pandemonium right now as the information is rolling into the comm center. 11:17, an incoming sheriff's deputy finds additional victim heading to the ER. This might have been confused as the suspect because he was running behind the emergency department. Is not typically where people are. 11:17, no police units are available to check on another threat they've got reported. About 11:20, incoming state patrol and another sheriff's deputy from another county locate the additional suspect that was matching the shooter's description. Again, near the freestanding emergency department, it's actually a victim with a gunshot wound to the hand. It's not a suspect. 11:20, the initial clearance has found no additional threat. 11:21, the rescue task force begins to enter the structure under armed escort of DNR game warden, state patrol, and I believe a fire marshal that maybe is armed too. Because we've been training our people that, your primary rescue task force protection element is not going to be the primary law enforcement agency, because where are you all going to be? If you're the primary response agency, you've already penetrated the building. So we're not going to have the police and fire try and link up with you. They're going to link up with whoever comes next for their security detail. Inside the theater, the entry teams have applied tourniquets and placed several victims in recovery position. And these are the police officers applying tourniquets. These are the deputies applying tourniquets. Applying a tourniquet is a simple skill if you've been trained and if you have the tourniquet. If you have not been trained and you don't have the tourniquet, it's not a simple skill at all. Buying your tourniquet on eBay and watching an online video is not the way to train for tourniquet use. There's a great video from Denver of a tourniquet application. You guys can Google that later. And those guys knew what they were doing. It was very clear that they were trained. Law enforcement inside is unable to give an accurate count of the victims, but believe it is between 10 to 20. Now, this victim thing threw us off when we started running scenarios, and even on a couple incidents that we had, some small-scale stuff. To law enforcement, victim is anyone that's involved in the crime. To us, on the EMS side, it's only injured people. So we try to make a very clear definition between patients and victims. There's too many patients for available transport. So the rescue task force teams identify multiple patients. They're triaged red. They need immediate medical intervention to survive. They've got center mass gunshot wounds. They've got tension pneumothorax, which is a collapsed lung, and blood in their airways. So we've got to get these people treated within the next few minutes or they're going to die. Outside the theater, there's a casualty collection point being established. There's a transport officer that's designed to eliminate any flow issues. He's making sure ambulances get in and get out, and when they leave, that they're loaded. The media is showing up, so they're put in a media quarantine. Family is also isolated somewhere, hopefully with a chaplain or somebody that can support their needs. City officials are arriving on scene. The egress is very congested, rapidly cleared by authorities, and additional ambulances have arrived in staging. At this point, all the salvageable patients are treated and transported and dispersed as best as hospital to regional trauma centers. So that's kind of the setup of why we're here. Those are the kinds of scenarios we train for and prepare for. That was obviously not a real scenario because I'd probably still be recovering from it if we had to deal with that, right? So I'm going to let Chief Hooker come up and let you know his piece of this. That's it? Just forward, back, get the video on.
Well, good morning, and thank you for getting up early to come listen to us. Very happy that Doc McNeil went first because he set the bar. He's probably the one that's going to get in trouble for what he said, and I'm safe for the day. So it's usually me that spouts something out that later on I get told I can't say. So how we got started in this, through those tabletops, we realized that in our county that we had some pretty significant things we needed to change if we were going to be successful during an active shooting. Just so you know, Rock County is about 162,000 people, the majority of them living in the cities of Janesville and Beloit. The rest of us are very small. My community is 2,100 people. So that's kind of why I had to ask Doc how to work the computer. I think there's more technology in this room than my whole community. So I have one officer patrolling. During the day and the week when I'm out, there's two of us, but for the most part, I've got one person on duty. Something I realized really fast is if we have anything, I'm overwhelmed before dispatch is done talking. So this is here, one of the things we learned is if we're gonna build that bridge to be successful, we got to start on both sides and come to the middle. I'd like to say that we've always worked really well together, but that's not always been the case. But in the last few years, police, fire, EMS, private sector, we've come together. If any of you are in the emergency management side, you know that the National Response Plan really pushes the partnership between government and the private sector. They say that's what makes successful planning. So we started with a meeting where we brought the Milwaukee Fire Department in. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Sikh temple shooting that happened in Wisconsin. That was a pretty big event for us. That was some jackass is what I guess I call him. Went to a church and he shot down people just because he didn't like them. He didn't like their religion. He didn't like what they stood for, which I think is really funny because the Sikh, they're very peace-loving, very kind people. I actually have a couple living in my community. They're terrific. I mean, to bring violence to them just, to me, was, I don't know, I guess 30 years I could still be amazed. So one of the things that came out of that, though, is that's in the metropolitan Milwaukee area. That's probably the biggest community in Wisconsin. They had everything under the sun show up that day. They had streets and streets blocked with squad cars. Talking with some of the people that were there, they think they had law enforcement agencies that they still don't know if they were there. They just heard. Another thing is, if you watched any of that, Lieutenant Brian Murphy was shot during that, shot pretty bad. And going in and rescuing him, it was all law enforcement. They were doing it, well, the guy was out in the parking lot and still actively shooting at him. The good thing about that is the guy that showed up that took him out was the range instructor and former SWAT sniper for the police department in that community. But one of the things out of that, Milwaukee said, is we really got to get it together. We got to get a formal plan. We need to make sure we have some control over this. So they came down and they started talking to us about Rescue Task Force and talking about the shooting at the theater there in Colorado, and how I think our D-Day was Columbine. I think we all remember the pictures of cops standing outside where you can still hear the shooting inside, waiting for SWAT to show up. I don't know what your communities are like. SWAT in Rock County, if we call them, you're looking at probably 45 minutes to an hour and a half before they're on scene. So definitely couldn't wait. The fire service, that theater shooting was theirs. They were staged down the street. A lot of the people that were injured or wounded in that shooting were taken to the hospitals by the police. So that's where the Rescue Task Force concept came out. So we were talking about that, and we were talking about, you know, we've got to do something. The docs are pushing. We got to get people in there. We got to start treating. We got to start saving lives. A lot of this was coming from the global war on terror. I think wars are bad, but I think a lot of our emergency medical techniques, that's where they come from. So we looked at during that, all of these things, and I apologize if I stray from the PowerPoint a little bit. I'm not very good at keeping up with them, so. When we were in there talking, it was kind of interesting because we decided that we needed to do the rescue task force. We decided we needed to pull a committee together, and we started looking at having a county-wide response to an active shooter. We did this because, like I said, we are small. If we have anything like that, the chances are probably at least 1 or 2 officers from every agency in the county are going to respond to it. We're all going to be there. So we wanted to make sure we had a system where we all knew what was going on. We were all singing out of the same songbook. And for me as a chief, more importantly, we were training our staff, my patrol staff. So when they went from my community up to Milton, they knew what they were doing. It's the same thing, no matter where it's at. One of the things that we started looking at is we were going to need to cross-train with fire. The first meeting, I would like to say, went really great. I'd love to say we all sat in there and went, yeah, man, this is great. We got to do this. It didn't go that well at all. We actually had a couple of people on the law enforcement side that were adamantly opposed to this. Just really couldn't understand why we were doing it, to the point that we actually had some screaming matches. And one chief yelled at me, and I yelled back because I'm pretty good at doing that. So I kind of thought it was, I don't know, I thought it was, to me, it was stupid. I know, why are we arguing about this? We're literally talking about the difference between saving lives and not saving lives. It's pretty much that simple. So we kind of pushed forward, and we kind of came up with the, like I said, we came up with a countywide response. We also started coming up with a PowerPoint presentation where we could take back to our briefings, take back to teach our patrol. Talked about when they went in, how they would work with the fire, the different tactics, the different movements from 2, 3, or 4 officers covering the fire group. One of the things that we stressed in there that is going over pretty well, that I wasn't sure, but once you go in, the fire guys are the ones, they're the ones really calling the shot. They're going in to save people. We're just going in to make sure that nobody shoots them while they're in there. So I think initially when we brought that out, I know a couple of my patrol staff are like, we're gonna be taking orders from fire, and weren't real happy about it. But as we started to practice it, I think they're starting to see why we're doing that. But like I said, we sat through that. We hammered out a really good countywide agreement. While we were going through the RTF thing, the Rescue Task Force, I think once we got going and once we understood the importance of doing it, getting the agreement was really, at that point, was easy. Setting up the training was easy. I will say right now, the fire service guys, Doc McNeil's our county medical control for our EMS. He mandated that all the fire service has to go through RTF. We're still, we're working on the police side, working to catch up. Matter of fact, when we get back, one of the things we're going to be doing is setting up a train-the-trainer class for all officers from each department, and they'll go back to their respective agencies, teach all the patrol people, and teach them how to go in, set up, and get a rescue task force in. But as we were talking about this, we got a lot of questions coming up. You know, who goes, who's in charge, who's coming, who's needed, where do casualties go? Honestly, it was one of these things, I think, as we started getting into it, the more we got into it, the more complicated it became. The more I think on the law enforcement side, we started thinking we got to do some changes. You know, we all know if something like that happens, we're going to need help, and we're going to need it now. We're going to need, you know, units to keep coming. One of the things we talked about that we want to avoid is we also know that when we're done with it, we don't need units. and we tell everybody everything's okay, back down, they're just gonna keep coming. I think they had over 400 law enforcement officers show up to the Sikh temple shooting, and they said it was way more than what they needed. They had one whole street like lined with armored response vehicles that by the time they got there, it was over and they weren't needed, but they just kept showing up. We have a thing in Wisconsin. I apologize. It's probably going on all over the country, but our fire service is involved in the mutual aid box alarm system. And I'm talking to my fire chief, and one of the things that he said is that he can call fire trucks from as far away as Indianapolis. So theoretically, if we have that kind of fire, we could have Indianapolis Fire Department there. If we have a fire that big, I hope I'm here at a conference or on vacation or someplace like that, because we got them coming from Indy, it's a bad day for us. Another thing that personally kind of got me involved in looking at we have to change a little bit is back when I was still on patrol, I got into a fight with a mentally disturbed person, and in the course of it, got a hold of my gun and just about shot my happy fat ass. So I was fighting with this guy for 12 minutes. We had something going on north of the county that day. All the deputies were up north. Nobody was down south. I found out later that there were departments that their officers were sitting on the edge of their jurisdiction waiting for somebody to say go, waiting for somebody to say go to Clinton and bail idiot out because he's in a fight with a mental guy. And it was kind of a lonely day for me in there, which after this, if anybody wants any more details, I'll be happy to tell you. So one of the things that I became passionate about is we have a mutual aid agreement. I mean, we do, but we have to ask for it. When you're having something like an active shooter, something big, all of you guys in here that have stood in incident command know you got a lot coming at you, especially in the first 20 minutes. I mean, you're juggling chainsaws while standing on blades in a blender and trying not to get chopped up. So we looked at our brothers and sisters in the fire service, saw this Mavis and thought, man, this is working. This is working really well. So we're going to steal the crap out of it, and we're going to call it something else so that down the road they can't say we stole their thing. So we actually formed a committee on that, and we had the president of the Rock County Fire Officers Association, who was a chief, come in and explain it to us. Basically what it is, we have cards that have, I think they're 1 to 8. They have different slots, the number of officers, supervisors, command staff, SWAT. You go in and you fill out. So then when you have a very bad day, like an active shooting, you can now get on the radio and you can say, I need box alarm 1 through 5. As the incident commander, I can look at my card and I know from 1 through 5, all this is coming. I don't have to get on and say, Beloit, can you send me 2? Janesville, can you send me 3? Dispatch, because of the way we did this agreement, dispatch can now go ahead and start calling those resources. Believe it or not, prior to this, they couldn't do that. We would actually have to tell them, can you request? With this, they can go ahead and they can start moving all the stuff that we need. So we're now working on the next phase of it is an accountability system, because that's something else. The fire service is way ahead of us. I mean, those guys are all in an engine company or a ladder company. They all work together. They live together. They all have adjoining recliners. So I had 14 years in the fire service, so I can take as many shots at them as I want. So if there's any fire service people in here, sorry, but as cops, and saying this as a chief, when we respond to something big, we kind of suck, because we're out there by ourselves, working in a car by ourselves. You know, when I was a patrol officer, and you know, usually the only time I saw the sergeant was because of something I said or something I did, and he was irritated with me. Otherwise, a couple communities I worked in, I very rarely saw my supervisor. We also know that when something big happens, because I've done it myself, we are the masters at asking for forgiveness and not permission. I mean, I went to a few things myself where I wasn't asked and got told, you know, you shouldn't have went. Ah, man, I'm really sorry. So what we're trying to do now is we're trying to control that. We don't want 300 cops showing up that we don't know about. I don't know how familiar you guys are with the Washington Navy Yard, but they were really lucky that no cops were shot that day. There were a lot of guys in plain clothes, had no markings on them. That's one of the things that in our mutual aid response system that we're saying, if you come on scene to any big thing, you have to have something that designates you as police. We have to know that you're a cop, whether it's a raid jacket, external vest with police, you have to have something. If you don't, we're not going to send you into the building, we're not going to send you into the scene. It's not worth a blue on blue. Like I said, the fire guys, they call it Mavis. We call it Mars. We have a tactical guy on our group, Jason Kelly, who is in our area is probably the foremost tactical guy we have. He's really good. He couldn't stand the fact that they were calling it Mavis for cops. So Jason decided to call it Mars, Mutual Aid Response System. If you knew Jason, I believe he calls it Mars because it reminds him of his home planet, because he is like a lot of those SWAT guys. He is nuts. So he likes going in where people are shooting at him. So we came up with Mars. It is a county-wide plan. We have every agency but two that signed in, and basically they haven't signed in because their lawyers are still hashing everything over. We are talking with our legislators in Wisconsin. We have two on board that in the next year are going to try to push it through so that we can do like fire. It's a law in Wisconsin. We are also right on the Illinois border. So by doing that, Illinois will be able to cross in to help us. We'll be able to cross in and help them take all the red tape out of it. So we are pushing to have this come into law, and we do seem to have the support for it. So hopefully after November, after the election, we still have all that support. The training, like I said, is countywide. Every patrol officer is going to go through the same thing. Every firefighter is going to go through the same thing. We are going to go as far, too, as once our people are trained and they're comfortable, I'll send my officers up to Janesville, Wisconsin to work with their firefighters. They would send people down and work with the firefighters in my community, and we're doing that so if we have something that happens, we know each other. We're comfortable with each other. We've worked together before. One thing that really kind of came to light out of Vegas that backed that up is I didn't know their fire academy and police academy are on the same grounds. Their firefighters and their cops from day one know each other. Throughout their training, they're crossing. So during the shooting in Vegas last year, presentation I saw, one of the things they said was that really, really helped. They knew each other. They were comfortable with each other. They were able to form rescue task force teams without having command or line supervisors tell them to do it. It was just, Bob, Jim, come on, let's go. So that's kind of where we're going. And we are going to start doing over 2 years. Countywide drill, it's going to be in my community. We're working with the state of Wisconsin Emergency Management. And one of the things during this whole thing that we found is if you have an emergency management agency, they're great for being your Switzerland. Because one great thing about emergency management people is when it comes to planning, staging, moving resources, it's what they do. I mean, they were very excited to get involved. They weren't really connected with any of the agencies, so they were kind of our neutral ground. We met a lot down at their place. They were really helpful in getting this off the ground. So this is where we signed. We came together as chiefs. We signed it. I put out to the press. I really didn't know if they would be interested in it because this was something that we were doing positive. We hadn't violated anybody's rights. We hadn't done anything wrong, so I wasn't sure if they would show up. They did. They were very interested. We got a lot of local news coverage over it. So that's Chief Mark Work from Milton. I let him speak to the press because he's much more elegant than I am. So. That's the card I was talking about. You can see the categories up there, like I said, patrol, supervisor, command, SWAT. Something I tell you if you ever do this too, that we were talking about, this is where this thing really became great, because one of the things in it is on my card, where I'm calling for command staff, I've actually got a couple of fire chiefs. The fire service, incident commands their life. So things for like logistics, staging, you know, rely on your fire service people. The chiefs and the command staff of the fire departments in our county, they were tickled pink. They were thrilled to be part of this. So that's kind of what the card looks like when it's filled out on each level. That, like I said, you look at it and it'll tell you what you have coming. So once you call it, like I said, as incident commander, you can look down and you know you have these resources. And then you can just keep expanding it out. We're down to 5 lines now because it's new. We're testing it. We plan on expanding out later. Matter of fact, we ran our first live test last week that over the radio that went pretty well. And,
I'm up next. I'll play the video.
okay, and so I'm going to let Doc come back and thank you for listening.
Thanks, Chief. So one thing I wanted to clarify is we don't have firefighters telling the cops what to do in a hot zone environment. What Chief was trying to illustrate is some of these meetings, there was just that clash of authority. And what it comes down to is the cops are in charge of the tactical situation and the EMS is in charge of patient care. That's what I think he was trying to illustrate. But when we brought that up at these meetings, there was just this connotation of, well, fire's going to tell us what to do, and that wasn't quite what we were shooting for with them. And eventually, Chief was able to get them all calmed down and get them back in the same room. So one of the things, when you're in a leadership position, you always have to justify everything you're doing to get resources, because if there's no margin, there's no mission, right? So one of the things I would encourage you to do is when you do these things, involve the media. The media always wants a story. And if you don't give them a story, they're still going to have a story without your perspective. So if you're doing tourniquet training with your officers, if your officers have an AED save, whatever, it might seem trivial to us because we do it every day, but to the media, that might be that 30 seconds that they couldn't fill with the story that night. And they're going to talk about home gardening at the retirement club at bingo night, So, get those bingo people pushed out. We need the good PR, right? So this is a story that they ran about the Mars.
Enforcement agencies in the area are working to improve their response times for emergencies.
News 3's Madeline O'Neill tells us what Rock County officials are doing to streamline their process and save precious time in case of a crisis. Madeline?
Charlotte and Eric, the about a dozen law enforcement agencies in Rock County are signing on to an agreement to set up a system called MARS, or the Mutual Aid Response System. Officials say it will shave seconds off of response time, which then can save lives. During a big emergency,
there are times of the week that I have a single officer working.
City of Milton Police Chief Scott Marquardt knows he'll need to request help from other agencies.
This is crucial for me.
But that can take time.
Those seconds matter.
Seconds that could be better spent elsewhere.
You can move on to those life-saving tasks without having to worry about, now, which officers from which jurisdiction do I need to get here right now?
Right now, during an emergency in the county, the commander on scene has to call in help from agencies in other jurisdictions individually.
If I'm having an active shooter and I get on the radio and I say, send me everything, they can't do that. Plus, what is everything?
but cards like these.
This is an example of one where the threat is a structure fire with an area in the city. There's fire hydrants.
Help fire departments in the county streamline the process by creating a sort of shorthand for calling on help.
Predetermining those resources allows the incident commander to focus on the emergency at hand.
It's called MABUS, or the Mutual Aid Box Alarm System. Through it, the Beloit Fire Department either provides or receives aid about 50 times a year.
The quicker you can get the resources on scene, it reduces the impact of the emergency.
Now, Rock County law enforcement agencies are adopting a similar system called MARS,
It's a shorthand.
the Mutual Aid Response System.
I can just say, give me level 1 through 3 of a MARS activation, and I'm done with that.
Something Mark Hort says has the potential to make all the difference.
When you think about the scope of an active shooter incident and all of the resources that takes, we absolutely need help there quickly. And again, this is the best way to shortcut that process.
Rock County law enforcement agencies began signing the MARS agreement at Black Hawk Technical College today. They'll work on getting it set up this spring.
Madeline O'Neill in the studio tonight. Thanks, Madeline.
Okay, so I'm back again. I'm going to try and get sped up a little bit here. It's almost 9 o'clock, which is 8 o'clock our time still, right? We're an hour behind in Wisconsin because of all the beer brats and cheese. We just run a little slower. Okay, so communications is crucial. This is, I could talk for an hour and a half about communications, but we're not going to do that. So we need to make sure our communications are clear, everybody's on the same page. If you use 10 codes and signals, you got to make sure that your fire guys understand what some of those mean if they're in a threat position to try and keep them safe. Okay, so my wife told me to sweep the house. I don't know why she's angry. We're clear. So communications. Dispatch is going to be inundated with calls within and with outside the agency. There's going to be interior communications on the scene going on. Some of your repeaters may not work when you're deep in the bowels of a building with concrete structure. So know your dead spots, know how to use tactical simplex frequencies. I need to delineate the hot warm zone, casualty collection point, rescue task force. Fire EMS operations are pretty much the same issues. They're more responsible for the medical aid and those components of it too. So within your rescue task force, determine who's going to communicate with the unified command or the operations sector. Is it going to be fire communicating? Is it going to be police? Is it going to be both? If you're using encrypted radios, can you even talk to the fire department? So those are all the pieces the comms people have got to figure out beforehand. We have a very robust communication center, and we're very fortunate that it's all consolidated and centralized. We have had high call volumes for some active shooter threats that we've had just within the past year or two. For prolonged incidents, they could bring more staff in. And we have backup communications and also communications response team, so they can actually bring telecommunicators to the scene, which is helpful with that flow of information. You might have heard of this. Jack Kabowski, he was some gun nut that stole a bunch of guns and said he was going to kill cops. That's always a bad day. FBI was involved. I know Chief Hooker and Chief Moore, who's here from Janesville, they were involved as well. Interoperable communications is important, whether you use VHF, UHF. We've got all of them in our county, so know how to interface and know how to patch and know how to use other people's channels and determine as best as you can before the incident what channels you might be using. For the call takers, they're going to be inundated with calls, texts, and radio transmission. We want all that information. So when there's an active shooter in a building, we want the people that are involved to be calling us to tell us where the shooter is, where the victims are, where the casualties are. The standard workflow may not work when we've done our scenarios, and a couple of these active shooters that we have had, granted they're on a small scale, but our telecommunicators could not keep up using the CAD. They have to go back to paper and hand off notes to each other. And information flow delays will cost lives. You may need an open line with someone that's actually on scene talking right to your comm center, just relaying on scene where they're getting calls from, where the active shooting is, where the patients are. And the communications officers themselves need to understand PD, fire, EMS, and what an RTF is. so they know who they're talking to on scene. And part of our training package is also training the telecommunicators. Okay, Dr. Wistrom.
Thanks to all of you who stayed. Time to buckle up, Buttercup. All right, so you've heard the whys and hows, and you know a lot of this stuff. What I'm here to talk about basically is how we did it, how it all came together, some of the stuff that, the traps that we fell into so that you can try to help avoid some of those things. And we'll try to make it pretty quick, but it all revolves around that question of what happens for medical care from time of injury until time safe to enter. I view that question as kind of the linchpin that got this whole thing moving. We knew we needed it. We knew we wanted it. But have you ever gotten 5 chiefs together and asked them to order a pizza? Have you ever tried that? How many pizzas did you get? 7? It's challenging. And you would think that in a small community where everybody knows each other and you know their sister and their mother and their uncle and their Aunt Fred and you're probably related in some way, that this would all work easier. It actually doesn't, because in Wisconsin we're a home rule state, so you are king of your kingdom. And like Chief Hooker alluded to, you have to ask for resources from other places in order to get them come, even though you have mutual aid agreements. And you have a lot of big personalities that are big fish in small ponds. And I think he warned you, we're not that politically correct, but I imagine many of you are in that situation. I'm one of those big fish in a small pond. It's easy to lose focus of what our mission is when we're talking about this, because we're in it to preserve life. We're in it for our citizens and our communities. And when we can't get the leadership to agree on something, for various reasons, many of them very valid, how do we go about getting that to happen? Well, I tell you, the way we did it, the way it worked, was not the way that we thought it would work, was to go through the schools. As nuts as that sounds, we all have kids that go to school together. That's something we can agree on. It's a place of safety. It's a safe haven. It's where we expect to drop our kids off at 8:30, pick them up at 3:30, and know that they're going to be educated, fed, and taken care of through that day. Right? Right. So when I propose the question to some of these chiefs and say, all right, well, there's a shooter in your kid's school right now. Well, you're going to have to try to keep me out of there. I said, yeah, the cops will keep you out of there if you're not part of the solution and you're not part of this planning. Right? He's not getting his AR and going in. He's going to be confused as one of the bad guys and taken out, and it's going to be a bad day for everybody. Oh, well, I never thought about it that way, Doc. Okay. So now let's talk about this. Let's figure it out and set our problems aside and be a part of this solution together. So this is the kit that Jay alluded to. We call it the casualty care in the classroom training. And it's the small victory that was fairly easy to do that got kind of the whole ball rolling. I'm going to give you a little background and we'll come back to that in a second. The global war on terror, terrible thing. One of the first wars that we looked at from a real scientifically medical standpoint. Taught us a lot. All right, causes of combat death. You've all seen this in various forms. So the red ones highlighted are the potentially preventable causes of combat death. You sum all of those up and it comes to about 88%. Where's the other 12? Well, it comes from infection and shock primarily. Well, any medical people in the room, what do we need to prevent infection and shock? What fights infection and shock? It's a pretty simple answer. It's blood, right? What's the best container for your body's blood? Your body. Good answer. Thank you. And by keeping your blood in your body, you can stave off the infection and shock. So when you add all these things up, what you're looking at is a pretty significant number of people in combat that could have been saved. Well, in the first 2 years of the global war on terror, they looked at all-cause death. And one of the most impressive stats was they were looking at all of this stuff. And if you were injured in theater during those first 2 years and you made it to a hospital alive, injured in theater, made it to the hospital alive, what are the chances you would die? Guesses? You sitting in front. I told them it was the splash zone.
Less than 5%.
Oh, no, higher than 5%, significantly higher. So about 17% of those people would die when they made it to the hospital alive. And when they looked at all of this and the why, what are the preventable causes here, they made basically two big changes. Is they said, well, maybe tourniquets aren't so bad. They did a little homework on that and decided to train everybody in tourniquets and equip them with it. And then they added a medicine called TXA, which we've been using since World War II, but you don't hear a lot about it because it's generic and it costs like $12 a dose. So there's no money to be made in it, but it's rebar for blood clots. Anyway, they made those two big changes, and with keeping the body's blood in the body today, if you're injured in theater and you make it to a hospital alive, what are the chances you'll die? About 2%. 17 to 2. It's huge. These numbers are a little bit different for civilians, right? We don't wear armor, we don't have helmets when we go to school, at least not yet. So we don't have those because we don't really have, due to privacy laws, we don't really have access to those people that survived these events to find out what were their injuries and how did all that stuff happen. We can look at some of the dead people, and there was actually a great report out of Pulse here probably a month ago or so. I would look that one up. It'll be good use for you when you go make your argument. So we put this together, we went out, formed a task force, tried to find a plug and chug solution to what can give us a little success of law enforcement, EMS working together to help protect our kids. There was nothing. There was no Hartford Consensus, Third Compendium. There was no Stop the Bleed campaign. There was none of that stuff out there. What we did find out there was people that had put a bunch of tourniquets in a backpack and put them in the nurse's office, because that's a great idea. Let's leave our place of relative safety to go get the supplies and go out into a dangerous area, again, to get them to where they're needed. Probably not the smartest plan. Oak Creek, Wisconsin, I don't know if anyone's in the house from there, but those guys had made some plans and had the idea that they should put these big medical kits in each of the school classrooms and teach the teachers how to use them. It's a brilliant idea. Problem with that was the kits they were trying to use and the training that would require was too cumbersome, and it needed to be quick and easy and implementable by anybody. So we boiled it down to, I'm going to back this up a second, these very simple things, and focus on those very life threats that we talk about, and keeping the body's blood in the body, addressing a sucking chest wound. We train it in 45 minutes, and we train it with our local people for our local people. So the whole process along, we developed it as a train the trainer, so that if Tuscaloosa, Alabama wants to do this, did I say that right? Alabama? Close? No? Maybe? So if they want to do it, it's their fire department, their EMS agency working together to teach their schools. Nobody knows your own backyard like you do. We knew that we were struggling with a problem. We knew other people were too. So we put the kits together. They're like $15 cost. The training is 45 minutes. And we started to see some good success. We got funding through a community grant. We did the whole city of Janesville as our first one, because that's right literally in our backyard. For about $10,000, we trained all of the schools, all of the school staff, I don't know, for 500 people, something like that, and equipped every single classroom in every private, parochial, Montessori, high school, elementary school, all the way down in the whole city. Took us a couple of months. Pretty easy win, a lot of press coverage, nothing like it at the time, lots of positive things. But what was interesting is we, as doctors, have to look at some of this stuff from a scientific standpoint too, and we actually asked them to take a survey before and after the training at 6 months and at a year. Because we go into these schools, and I was very surprised by a few things, but one of the things that surprised me a lot is I thought we would go in and the teachers would be scared. I really did. Oh, you think this is such a serious threat here that you want to come teach us all this stuff? I thought they would be afraid that we thought it was such a bad thing that we wanted them to know this stuff, and that we would sort of pull the carpet out from under them, or their false sense of security, that when something happens, they're going to have Delta Force and everybody else there in 5 minutes. Well, when you start explaining to them why, I didn't have to get very far down the road to actually see their fears ease. And I asked a bunch of them. I talked to all these folks that we were talking to, and it was so interesting to me that they were more afraid when they started, before we introduced that we were going to come teach them, excited to learn about it after they got over their initial apprehension, and confident and empowered after the education that they felt that they could contribute to a successful resolution of this. Isn't that weird? That these school teachers, I had many of them come up and say, you know, I didn't come here to work in a combat zone. Every time I see this on the news, no matter where it is, because it's anywhere USA, I think about it to my kids. I think about it in my classroom, and I don't know what to do. And that fear of the unknown, that fear of unpreparedness is what really consumed a lot of those teachers that we were going in and providing this education for. So it was very interesting to me how that worked. I also have to invoke the law of unintended consequences because once success happened with law enforcement and EMS and fire, success just continued to happen. Nothing breeds success like success, right? So we took this and we kept it motivated, and we kept it motivated into the rescue task force. We had some community members come ask us, hey, can you come to our bank and teach us how to do that stuff you did at the schools? Well, shoot, almost swore there. I see you, camera. Yeah, I suppose we could do that. We haven't figured out that curriculum yet. There's really nothing, there's no beacon, there's no, well, how do we do that in the public? The tools are a little bit different. We use the SWAT T. For those of you familiar with tourniquets, this is not your patrol tourniquet. That one you saw in the package, it looks like a big rubber band. It's a horrible self-application. To try to put it on yourself to save your own skin, you would lose. But to put it on somebody else, and for a novice to put it on to somebody else, it doesn't have any moving parts. It doesn't require any fine motor skills to speak of. It doesn't require any great strength, and it has no size limitations. So I took a cat T home and I tried it on my daughter who was in the Montessori school. I couldn't get it to tighten down, like at all. Their circumference limited. I said, well, this isn't going to work. We got to figure out something else. That's where we came up with that one. But these are a little bit dated numbers. We've trained about 15,000 school staff. I think we're in 15 or 17 states, something like that. A bunch of high school students, churches, believe it or not, churches came to us and asked for this education. I'm sure some of you are dealing with that right now with all the church shootings and stuff, of people wanting to carry concealed to church. Yeah, they're worried about it. Schools, technical colleges, basically, where in the world do we have a critical threshold of people trained to deal with an acute medical problem or an acute event like this, where they see it a lot and get over it quickly? There's somewhere in the world. Israel, I heard it grumbled down front. Why? Because they have that critical mass of people. It's not necessarily that their events are all that different than ours. They are, but they're injured people, right? From some projectile, they're similar. But they have mandatory military service for all of their citizens, where they learn some of these basic life skills. We recently in Wisconsin passed a law that you have to learn CPR before you graduate high school. That's great, right? Hemorrhage control is the CPR of trauma. If you wait to do CPR on a trauma patient, they're gone. You got to keep things going before then. So we hit the high school students. We're trying to create this critical mass. So here's the results of that survey, and basically what it says is that in 45 minutes we train them, they're confident in it, they can do it at a year, and believe it or not, the likelihood that they think it would happen didn't change a bit, and their apprehensions and fears about it actually went down. Pretty exciting. So the workplace casualty care came as a consequence of it, of people coming to us. How am I doing on time? 20 minutes? We got to leave at least 22 minutes for questions. We're going to have to go plaid. No Spaceballs fans in the room? Gosh. All right, so we've trained all these people. We trained all the staff in the theater. We've been out there doing a lot of it. And as a consequence of that success, the RTF became an easier sell, because we got the involved parties with a stake in the game, and we showed them that, yes, we can work together. Yes, we can do this. Yes, we can be successful at it. And we also have the schools saying, all right, well, this is great. I can do all this stuff, but you're really going to leave me in here for hours? Come on. didn't train to be a doctor. I'm glad I can survive through this, but let's get with the program. So the schools actually started pushing a little bit for it too, which was very helpful to have a very interested third party pushing us towards success. For a minute, TECC, how many in this room have had TECC? What, 10%? All right, we run a class every other month, Janesville, Wisconsin, come on up. Best 8 hours you'll ever spend to save your life and go home at night. TECC is medical care basically for you. It's beyond first aid, it's beyond self-care and buddy care. It's the basics of how to survive through that first few minutes of a traumatic incident where you've been injured. TCCC, probably some of you have had that. This is great training. It's out there in a lot of places. They've added some of it to some law enforcement academies around the country. It really should be mandatory for everybody. But TECC is primarily for law enforcement agents and how to survive if they are hurt, their colleague is hurt, or the motorist, or the bad guy that they just shot so he can spend his day in court. In the era of video recording all of this stuff with the body cams, I think it's all the more important than ever. Now that sounds weird for me to say that. Preservation of life is my #1 duty. I swore that Hippocratic oath and I believe it. But we need to hold ourselves to a very high standard in caring for people as people. RTF and TEMS are very different. And we had at least an hour explaining this to people, that RTF and TEMS are very, very different things. I'm going to explain it to you in a sentence. TEMS are EMS folks for the SWAT team, whereas RTF is for your line officers, line firemen, those that are staffing right now in the patrol cars and in that firehouse. That was a run-on sentence, but it was a sentence. They're very different. RTF is day-to-day for the unknown. TEMS is for usually planned events. A lot of SWAT stuff is planned. Those SWAT things that aren't planned, you have a little bit of time to plan. That's part of planning, is what makes us so successful. I like this, but Photoshop didn't like my purple. Red and blue, we're purple guys. We really are. We are on the same team. We have the same objectives. We are all public service. We are all public safety. And we are all here to serve the citizens. We are not different. So RTF, Jason Kelly and Doug Anderson out of Beloit Police at the time in 2001 actually wrote a paper on this. It was published in the Tactical Edge. It's a pretty good paper. It's called Confined Threat Escort at the time. So it's not a new concept. It's been around for a while. But when you mention it as RTF, it's like nobody's ever heard of it before. There's some great guidelines out there. There's some great ones in Virginia. Milwaukee County had one. Basically, in order to get our end of it taken care of, Jay said, you must. We developed a curriculum and said, you must, from a fire standpoint, because we can do that, you must take this training. And so by the you must take this training, that just furthers the success and moving things along. All right. Yeah, you talked about that. TECC, I think we've talked about that. This is a basic TECC class. Simple stuff. Keep the blood in the body, stay warm. Don't forget to breathe. Feels like medical school on the first day. TEMS, we do have TEMS. We work with the NTOA and provided a TEMS course. Again, law of unintended consequences. So we're working on the RTF, and basically RTF is Confined Threat Escort. It is taking EMS folks in under armed escort to a place where there's a bunch of wounded people to do life-saving stuff there, stabilize, and work on an extraction plan. It's pretty simple and straightforward. So I asked Dr. Goldfinger over here. I didn't say brown finger. Guy's got a knack for finding money. So I asked him, I said, hey, Jay, can we get a hallway somewhere? I don't know, is there a hallway in the hospital that we can shut down for a little while so that we can go through and practice some of this stuff? And he says, oh, I'll think about that. Like 3 days later, he says, hey, I want to show you something. So he takes me down to the basement of this facility where there used to be some old outpatient operating rooms. And he says, this is yours. What? There's 25,000 square feet of indoor climate-controlled training space that they weren't using, would cost them a bunch of money to make them ORs again. And they said, well, how nice do you want it to be? We said, don't make it nice at all. And what's your budget? Well, we'll figure it out. And so they said, yeah, it's yours. Go ahead, use it. It's incredible. We have set up in there, and I think it's in here somewhere. Yeah, Bill, if you build it, it'll come. We have set up scenarios in there where there is a full-on church with pews and a lectern. There is a movie theater with a projector and surround sound, and it's dark and loud and obnoxious, and we pop popcorn, and we try to make it as real as possible. There's classrooms that when I showed my wife, she started crying. She's not that sensitive. She's an OBGYN. She's got a tough stomach. But she started crying because there's mannequins in there, and there's desks, and there's classroom stuff and books and all the stuff that you would find in a classroom, and with the kids' names even on the desk. Now, we didn't write the names out, but Sophie and Josephine happened to be sitting next to each other, which are the names of my kids, and she lost it. She says, I can't believe you have to do this. I said, we have to do this. We have to do this because we need to train as realistically as possible, because if the defecation hits the oscillation, it can't be the first time these guys have felt these emotions. It needs to be routine. They need to be going through it. It's going to be scary. We can deal with it later. But you got to get through that initial incident, put the bad guy down, and start working on recovery. She said she could never do my job, so that's good. At least I got that going for me. That's nice. I like the nightclub, too. We need to have the office party in there this year. Disco balls, loud music. But again, you turn the lights out, you put on the laser show, and you fill it with a bunch of paramedic students, and you say, go find the sick person and take care of them. It's obnoxious to go in there and train in that environment. Having worked on an ambulance, it's obnoxious to go into a bar fight too. The portable oxygen actually makes a great tool in clearing pathways, in case you were curious. It works well, sort of like a fire extinguisher. So, it takes the community to do this. And we put on these big events, and we do the rescue task force training, we do these live evolutions, we ask for volunteers, and you'd be amazed at who comes. Anyone can rent our tactical center except the zombie apocalypse team. They tried. Apparently that exists in our community. So you have to have some attachment to either law enforcement or EMS. The zombie apocalypse hasn't quite made it yet. But when we put a call out for role players, IT, surprisingly, is the first one to answer. We may have told him it was a casting call for The Walking Dead. There would be free Pokemon cards. But they love it, and they love being a part of it. And the teachers that we have done a lot of this training with are now volunteering back with us so that we can do the training for the RTF and for the TEMS. And the community is supportive around this whole beautiful law of unintended consequences. Yeah, we learned a lot of lessons. I didn't know about home rule. How many live in a home rule state? Yeah, good luck with that. I learned a lot about politics. Believe it or not, I did not go into medicine to be a politician. I was a redneck long before I was a doctor. I was an auto mechanic before I was a doctor, actually. But I learned, too, that when you can get people to see that your cause is pure and your intentions are real, and we are after taking care of this community in the best way we can, taking care of our officers, taking care of our firefighters, taking care of our kids, and that we need to do this together. We cannot do it alone. As much as our egos like to think that we are greater than we probably are, we must form these relationships. We must train for it, and we must work together. For us, that school program was our first taste of success, and it got the ball rolling really well for us. I'm sure there's a lot of ways to do it, but the only way to do it wrong is to not do it at all. All right. Preguntas. Questions, comments, concerns, thoughts? It's recorded, so if you could please to the microphone or shout it out and I'll repeat it. All right, so let's time out. Anyone who wants to actually split, get out of here so that those who want to stay and ask questions can get their questions answered.